My interest in photography began when I received my first camera as a gift from my mother, who was living in England. I was in Jamaica, and amongst one of the many parcels we received occasionally from England, either for birthdays or special occasion, there was a camera in it. And you can imagine I was very pleased about that. The camera I had was a Kodak Brownie 127. It was just the smell. The smell was very different from anything I had, because where I lived, it was quite rural. We didn't have a lot of manufactured goods. So we noticed the smells of anything. Books as well had a very special smell. What interested me about the camera was how the image got from there to here, to inside the camera, the whole science of it. Because again, we had no reference to any of this sort of technology. So that was one of my first interests, and then I started taking more of an interest in the art of it in terms of producing an image. I had seen a camera before. We had a district photographer who would visit various people, either by request or just visit on the off chance that you might want a photograph taken. And he had come to our house and taken a photograph, which was subsequently sent to England here. And I have that photograph. That was the first photograph of me. I still have that photograph at home. And I remember, I think I'd got the camera by then, and his instructions to me at the time was, keep the sun behind you and squeeze the shutter, don't press it. And that was my only initial instructions on how to use the camera. When I arrived in Handsworth in 1965, my parents had a shop in Grove Lane, 32, and we lived above the shop. We sold grocery. There were the 6 boys in the family, including me. So it was quite cramped, and the back garden was even more cramped. I mean, it was literally, I would say about, if that, 6 yards square, perhaps less. 6 meters square, let's call it that. I think it might even have been less. And so we had very little places to play in the back garden, so we would play in the avenue next to the garden. And again, that, if you like, got me involved with the local community a little bit more, watching how people live, where they live, you know, what they were talking about. And again, the shop was quite good, because customers would come to get their groceries, and while they're there, I would listen to conversation about their lives in England, how they would work in factories, in shops, those who would come to retirement and were getting their gold watches and so on. You know, they're disillusioned with England, or they're just being pleased with it, new families who they've sent for. So all the stories were being relayed, if you like, in that environment. I was quite conscious of the negative aspects of the representation of black people in the mainstream press and in general. It was always quite negative, and television programs were invariably about war. I think the Biafran War was taking place at the time. There's a Congo relics of that. There was the Kashmir War in Pakistan, and there's a whole guerrilla warfare that was taking place, liberation, I should say, struggle that was taking place in Southern Africa, West Africa, and so on, against the old empires. That all fed into and influenced how I went about taking photographs. History is normally written by the victor, and we were complaining as a group of people. We were complaining about the way our history was written, and I felt it was important that I, having the opportunity to take photographs, should do something to document our own history. So that has been a passion ever since, to document the history of the black community in Handsworth in Birmingham.
I didn't even realise at the time I started working with Vanley that the black community here in Birmingham was mainly Jamaican. So it was a great learning experience on all sorts of levels for me to come over and just look at images with Vanley and listen to him and learn this whole story of of the Jamaican community here in Birmingham, coming over in the first place to work on the buses and in the hospitals, and how they'd been encouraged by Birmingham City Council through the kind of period sense, the wonderful period detail in some of the 60s, 70s photography, and then that sort of sense of Enoch Powell. I thought Enoch Powell was Wolverhampton, but I hadn't realised he made the Rivers of Blood speech here in Birmingham. So I began to get fascinated in terms of the history that was behind Vanley's photographs.
I mean, at the time in the 70s when I took the photograph of Wilfred, the boy with the flag, and I came across him one Saturday morning in the park riding his bicycle. He stood, there, and I just took a few photographs of him standing by his bike, looking at me. Fortunately, the wind was blowing, so we had this bicycle, with the flag in the right position. I think if we didn't have a little gust of wind at the time, I don't think that photograph would have worked as well as it has done. For me, it was just this young black kid with a flag on his bike, decorating his flag, but it evoked a strange feeling in you. I mean, this whole thing about belonging and identity was very strong at the time. And here's this young kid, just bold, cutting across all those arguments with his bicycle and this flag, and I just thought it was so brave and wonderful of him. So I took the photograph. Yeah. Strangely enough, his son was subsequently shot. I think it's in 2004, if I'm not mistaken. And I photographed the funeral of his son as well. So the connection with the people in the photograph, it's an ongoing connection with the photograph. Some of them I know personally, others are just acquaintances, and some of them are people I don't see again.
There was a whole European delegation came here after Enoch Powell's speech, and just seeing the extent to which it went on and the extent to which the National Front tried to adopt Birmingham as a place for them, and the way in which they were protected by the police. And it was really left to the Socialist Workers' Party, Black Power, to defend Birmingham for the Jamaican community. Yeah.
I'm glad you call it the Dismantlers, really, because that's the title I gave it, because that's on the wall behind it, and it seems to fit the photograph. That was taken outside, not far from Winson Green Prison, where Robert Ralph, an English guy, decided to sell his house to a white family. He advertised his house for sale to a white family only. He had broken the law and was put in Winson Green, and the National Front had come to organize a rally in support of him, and the anti-Nazi came out. And the photograph you see is the police in between the two groups. But they weren't prepared, as you can see, and they just raided the back gardens of local people and got the dustbin lids, which they used as shield to protect themselves. And you can see from the debris in front of them, the rocks that were being hurled at them. I don't have many regrets, but perhaps one would be a photograph I didn't take on that occasion, and it was a young girl who went and gave a pose in front of the line of policemen. I just felt the matter I was dealing with at the time was so serious, and she was being trivial, but I think, that's one that got away, really.